My name is Detective Marcus Thompson, and I've been serving at Brooklyn Heights Police Station for 18 years. In all my time on the force, I've encountered murderers, thieves, drug dealers, and every kind of criminal you can imagine. But sometimes, you meet someone whose story shakes you to your very core. Someone who makes you question everything you thought you knew about justice, desperation, and the lengths a parent will go to save their child. This is the story of David Chen, a 39-year-old man who worked as a night security guard at a downtown office building. When I first saw David, he was sitting in our interrogation room with his head buried in his hands. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and there was something about him that told me this wasn't your typical criminal. David was a man of small stature, probably around 5 feet 6 inches, with graying hair at his temples despite his age. His hands were calloused from years of hard work, and when he looked at me, I saw something I rarely see in criminals: genuine remorse mixed with complete devastation. He wasn't angry, he wasn't defiant, he wasn't making excuses. He was broken. "Detective Thompson," he said when I introduced myself, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know why I'm here. I know what I did, and I know I deserve whatever punishment is coming to me." Those words hit me harder than any confession I'd ever heard because they came from a place of such deep pain that it was almost tangible in that small room. Let me tell you about David Chen's life. Before that fateful night that brought him to my station, David immigrated to America from Taiwan when he was just 22 years old. He came with nothing but a dream and a determination to build a better life. He worked 3 jobs in his early years, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day, and doing odd jobs on weekends. He lived in a tiny studio apartment in Queens, sending half of his earnings back to his elderly parents in Taiwan. At 28, David met Sarah Martinez at a community English class. Sarah was a single mother working as a nurse's aide, struggling to make ends meet while raising her 4-year-old daughter, Emma, on her own. Emma's father had abandoned them when she was just an infant, leaving Sarah to face the challenges of parenthood alone. David fell in love not just with Sarah, but with little Emma too. He saw in them the family he had always dreamed of having. David and Sarah married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the local community center. David legally adopted Emma, and she began calling him Daddy, a word that would come to define every decision he made for the rest of his life. They moved to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, and for the first time in years, David felt like he had found his place in the world. Emma was the light of David's life. She was a bright, curious child with Sarah's dark eyes and an infectious laugh that could brighten even David's most exhausting days. After working his night shift, David would come home to find Emma waiting for him with drawings she had made at school, stories about her friends, or questions about everything, from why the sky was blue to whether there were people living on the moon. David would spend hours with Emma before she went to school, helping her with homework, teaching her to ride a bike in the courtyard of their apartment building, and reading her bedtime stories when Sarah had to work late shifts at the hospital. He learned to braid her hair, attended every parent-teacher conference, and never missed a school play or art show. Sarah often told her friends that David was the most devoted father she had ever seen. "He loves Emma like she came from his own blood," she would say. Actually, he loves her more than some biological fathers love their children. And it was true. David had poured all his hopes, dreams, and love into this little girl who had given his life meaning and purpose. When Emma was 8 years old, Sarah gave birth to their son, Michael. David thought his heart couldn't hold any more love, but Michael proved him wrong. Now he had 2 children who called him Daddy, 2 little voices that greeted him when he came home from work, 2 sets of tiny arms that hugged him tight when he tucked them into bed. Life wasn't easy financially, but they were happy. David had been promoted to head security guard at his building, which came with a small raise and better health insurance. Sarah had completed her nursing degree and was working full-time at Brooklyn General Hospital. They had managed to save enough money to put a small down payment on a house in a safer neighborhood with better schools. Emma was now 12 years old, an honor roll student who wanted to be a doctor like the ones who worked with her mother. She was kind, responsible, and mature beyond her years. Michael was 4, full of energy and mischief, but with the same gentle heart that Sarah and David had tried to nurture in both their children. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. David had just finished his night shift and was walking to his car when Sarah called him. Her voice was shaking, and at first, he thought something had happened at the hospital. "David, you need to come home right now," she said, her words broken by sobs. "What's wrong? Is it Michael?" "Emma." David's heart was already racing as he started the car. "It's Emma. She collapsed at school. They called an ambulance. We're at Brooklyn General right now." David drove like a man possessed, running red lights and weaving through traffic to get to the hospital. When he arrived, he found Sarah in the pediatric waiting room, still wearing her scrubs from the night shift she had just finished. Her face was pale, and she was clutching Emma's school backpack like a lifeline. "The doctors are running tests," Sarah said as David pulled her into his arms. She was in math class, and suddenly she just fell. She was unconscious when the paramedics arrived, but she woke up in the ambulance. "David," she was so scared, "asking for you." They waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 90 minutes before Dr. Elizabeth Rodriguez, the pediatric neurologist, came to speak with them. Dr. Rodriguez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, but her expression was grave as she sat down across from David and Sarah. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, I need to discuss Emma's test results with you," she began gently. "We found a mass in Emma's brain, specifically in her cerebellum. It's what we call a medulloepithelioma, a rare type of brain tumor." The words hit David like a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs, and the room seemed to spin around him. Sarah gasped and grabbed his hand so tightly that her nails dug into his skin. Is she going to be okay?" Sarah whispered. Dr. Rodriguez took a deep breath. "This type of tumor is aggressive, and its location makes it particularly challenging to treat. However, it's not impossible. Emma will need immediate surgery to remove as much of the tumor as possible, followed by intensive chemotherapy and radiation treatments. Whatever it takes," David said immediately. "Whatever she needs, we'll do it. Money is no object. Just tell us what we need to do." Dr. Rodriguez nodded. "I understand your determination, and that's exactly the attitude Emma will need from her family. However, I need to be honest with you about the costs involved. The surgery alone will cost approximately $150,000. The chemotherapy protocol we're recommending is a newer treatment that shows promising results for this type of tumor, but it's expensive, about $50,000 per cycle, and she'll need at least 6 cycles. The radiation therapy will be another $75,000. David was doing the math in his head, and the numbers were staggering. "So we're talking about, what, over $450,000? At minimum," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. "And that's assuming no complications. If Emma needs additional surgeries or develops complications from the treatments, the cost could be significantly higher. I know this is overwhelming, but time is critical. This type of tumor grows quickly, and every day we delay treatment reduces Emma's chances of survival." After Dr. Rodriguez left, David and Sarah sat in stunned silence. They had health insurance through Sarah's job at the hospital, but they both knew it wouldn't cover experimental treatments or the full cost of such extensive care. Their insurance had a maximum annual benefit of $100,000, which wouldn't even cover the surgery. "We'll figure it out," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We'll take out loans, mortgage the house we haven't even bought yet. Ask our families for help." David nodded, but he was already running the numbers in his head. His parents in Taiwan lived on a small pension. They couldn't help financially. Sarah's mother lived in a nursing home in Arizona, and her brother was struggling with his own family's expenses. They had no wealthy relatives, no secret savings accounts, no trust funds to tap into. That night, while Emma slept peacefully in her hospital bed, unaware of the storm gathering around her, David sat by her bedside and made a promise. He whispered it so quietly that even Sarah, sleeping in the chair next to him, couldn't hear. "I will not let you die, baby girl. Whatever it takes, however much it costs. Wherever I have to go or whatever I have to do, I will not let this thing take you away from us." Over the next week, David and Sarah threw themselves into researching treatment options, insurance appeals, and financial assistance programs. They contacted every charity organization they could find, applied for medical loans, and started a crowdfunding campaign online. The response was heartwarming. Friends, neighbors, even strangers donated what they could. But after 2 weeks of frantic fundraising, they had raised only $18,000, a drop in the bucket compared to what they needed. The insurance company denied their appeal for coverage of the experimental chemotherapy, classifying it as investigational rather than standard care. The medical loan companies either rejected their applications due to their modest income or offered loans with interest rates so high that the monthly payments would be impossible to manage. Emma's condition was deteriorating. She was having more frequent headaches, occasional seizures, and her coordination was becoming affected. Dr. Rodriguez had scheduled the surgery for the following Monday, but she had made it clear that without the follow-up treatments, the surgery would only buy them a few months at best. It was during this darkest period that David met Tommy Castellano. Tommy was a patient visitor at the hospital. His own daughter had been treated for leukemia at Brooklyn General 2 years earlier. Tommy had noticed David sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, looking defeated, and had struck up a conversation. "I know that look," Tommy had said, sitting down across from David without invitation. The look of a father who would do anything to save his kid but doesn't know how. David looked up at this stranger, a man in his 50s with silver hair, expensive clothes, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. "Your daughter?" David asked. "Leukemia," Tommy nodded. "She's fine now, thank God. In remission for 18 months. But I know what it's like to stare at medical bills. That might as well be asking for the moon." "How did you manage it?" David asked desperately. Tommy smiled, but there was something sad in his expression. "Let's just say I found a way to make the money I needed quickly. Very quickly." He slid a business card across the table. "If you're interested in hearing about some opportunities, give me a call. I help fathers who find themselves in impossible situations." David stared at the card. It was simple, just Tommy's name and a phone number. No business name, no title, no indication of what kind of opportunities Tommy might be referring to. "What kind of opportunities?" David asked. Tommy glanced around the cafeteria, then leaned in closer. "The kind that can solve your financial problems in a few nights instead of a few years. The kind that ask you to take some risks, but guarantee results. The kind that most good fathers would never consider, until they're facing what you're facing." David felt a chill run down his spine. He understood what Tommy was implying, and everything in his moral compass screamed at him to walk away. But then he thought about Emma lying in that hospital bed, about the tumor growing in her brain while he sat here, without the means to save her. "I'm not a criminal," David said quietly. "Neither was I," Tommy replied. "I was an accountant for 30 years. Never even got a speeding ticket. But when my little girl needed me, I learned that being a good man and being a good father sometimes require different choices." That night, David lay awake staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept beside him. In his wallet, Tommy's business card felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. He thought about Emma's laugh, about the way she had looked at him the day before and asked, "Daddy, am I going to be okay?" He had told her yes, of course she would be okay. Daddy would make sure of it. But how could he make sure of it? How could he keep that promise with $3,000 in their savings account and bills that totaled nearly $500,000? 3 days later, after the insurance company denied their second appeal and the last medical loan application was rejected, David made the call. "Tommy? It's David. David Chen. We met at the hospital." "David, I was hoping I'd hear from you. How's your daughter?" We're running out of time. Surgery is scheduled for Monday, but without the money for treatment afterwards." "I understand. Are you ready to hear about those opportunities one mentioned?" David closed his eyes and thought about Emma's face. "Yes, I'm ready to hear about them." And that phone call, made from the hospital parking lot while his daughter slept upstairs, would change everything. David Chun, the devoted father who had never even cheated on his taxes, was about to enter a world he never imagined he would be part of. But for Emma, for his little girl who called him daddy and trusted him to keep her safe, he was willing to cross any line, break any law, and sacrifice any part of himself. He just didn't realize how much of himself he would lose in the process, or that saving Emma's life might cost him everything else that made life worth living. The weight of a father's love, David was about to learn, can be heavier than any burden a man is meant to carry. Tommy Castellano's opportunities were exactly what David had feared they would be when they met the next evening at a small diner in Queens, far from the hospital and their respective neighborhoods. Tommy laid out a world that David had only seen in movies. "I run a crew," Tommy explained over coffee that David couldn't taste due to the knot in his stomach. "We're not violent people, David. We're not thugs or gangsters. We're professional problem solvers for people who have problems that can't be solved through legal channels. You mean thieves, David said bluntly. I mean specialists, Tommy corrected. We target people and institutions that have more money than they know what to do with. And we redistribute some of that wealth to people who desperately need it. Like you. Like me when my daughter was sick. Tommy explained that his crew focused on high-end residential burglaries, targeting wealthy families who were away on extended vacations or business trips. They had inside information from various sources: hotel concierges, travel agents, house cleaners, and security company employees who were well compensated for their cooperation. The beauty of our operation, Tommy said, is that we only hit people who won't even notice the loss. These are families with multiple homes, people who have so much jewelry they can't remember what they own. We take items that have been sitting in safes for years, things that are covered by insurance anyway. David listened in horrified fascination as Tommy described their methods. They used sophisticated techniques to disable security systems. They knew exactly what to look for to maximize value while minimizing bulk. And they had established fences who could move high-end goods quickly and discreetly. The average job nets between $200,000 and $500,000, Tommy said, after expenses and everyone's cut. A new member like you would walk away with about $100,000 per job. Do 3 jobs with us, and you'll have enough to cover Emma's entire treatment. David's head was spinning. 3 jobs, 3 nights of work, and Emma could have the best medical care available. It seemed almost too good to be true. What if we get caught? David asked. Tommy's expression grew serious. That's always a risk, which is why we're extremely careful. I've been doing this for 3 years, and none of my crew has ever been arrested. We spend weeks planning each job. We have backup plans for our backup plans. And we only work with people we trust completely. Why are you offering this to me? You don't even know me. Tommy was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Because I see myself 3 years ago sitting across from me. I see a good man who's been pushed to the edge by circumstances beyond his control. I see a father who would do anything for his child. He looked directly at David. And honestly, because we need someone with your background. My background. You're a security guard, David. You understand security systems. You know how buildings work. You can spot vulnerabilities that the rest of us might miss. Plus, you have no criminal record, which means you're not on anyone's radar. You'd be an asset to the team. That night, David went home and sat beside Emma's bed, watching her sleep. She looked so small and fragile, her face pale from the medication they were giving her to control her seizures. Sarah was working a double shift at the hospital, trying to earn every extra dollar she could, leaving David alone with his thoughts and the impossible choice before him. Emma stirred and opened her eyes. Daddy, why aren't you sleeping? I was just thinking about you. Sweetheart, David said, taking her small hand in his. Are you worried about the money? Emma asked with the kind of insight that children sometimes have that breaks their parents' hearts. I heard you and Mommy talking about it. David struggled to keep his voice steady. Don't you worry about that, baby girl. Daddy is going to take care of everything. You just focus on getting better, okay? Emma nodded and squeezed his hand. I love you, Daddy. Thank you for always taking care of me. Those words sealed David's fate. The next morning, he called Tommy and said yes. The first job was scheduled for the following weekend. The target was a mansion in the Hamptons, owned by a tech billionaire who was currently on a 3-month tour of Europe with his family. The house was worth $15 million and contained art, jewelry, and collectibles worth several million more. David spent the week learning from Tommy's crew. There was Marcus Williams, a former electrician who specialized in security systems. Sophia Reyes, an ex-gymnast who could get through spaces that seemed impossible. And James Park, a computer programmer who could hack electronic locks and disable surveillance equipment. They were all parents. Marcus had a son with autism who needed expensive specialized education. Sophia's mother was dying of cancer and needed treatments not covered by Medicare. James's wife had been in a car accident and required round-the-clock care. Tommy hadn't lied. They weren't hardened criminals. They were desperate people who had been driven to desperate measures by circumstances beyond their control. The key, Tommy explained during their planning sessions, is to think of this as a business operation. We're not breaking into someone's home. We're executing a carefully planned wealth transfer. We get in, We take what we need, we get out. Clean, professional, efficient. David learned about different types of security systems, how to identify valuable items quickly, and how to move through a house without leaving traces. His experience as a security guard proved invaluable. He could spot cameras, motion detectors, and pressure plates that the others might miss. The night of the first job, David's hands were shaking as he put on the dark clothes and latex gloves that Tommy had provided. He had told Sarah he was working a double shift at his building, and she had kissed him goodbye and told him to be safe. The irony was not lost on him. The mansion was even more impressive than the photographs had suggested. It sat on 5 acres of manicured grounds, protected by a 12-foot privacy fence and a state-of-the-art security system. But Tommy's inside information had been accurate. The family was definitely away, and the security company had been told that the system would be offline for maintenance that weekend. David watched in fascination and horror as his new teammates went to work. Marcus disabled the alarm system with the ease of someone who had installed hundreds of similar systems. Sophia scaled a second-story balcony like it was a playground monkey bars. James hacked the electronic door locks in under 3 minutes. Once inside, David was overwhelmed by the sheer opulence of the place. The entry hall alone was larger than his entire apartment, with a chandelier that probably cost more than he made in a year. Original paintings lined the walls. David recognized a Monet and what looked like it might be a Picasso. "Focus," Tommy whispered. "We're not here for sightseeing. David, check the master bedroom for jewelry. Sophia, you take the home office. Look for small valuables and cash. Marcus, start on the electronics, flat screens, stereo equipment, anything portable and valuable." David made his way upstairs to the master suite, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the neighbors could hear it. The bedroom was the size of a small house, with a walk-in closet that contained more clothes than David had ever seen outside of a department store. The jewelry collection was in a wall safe behind a mirror. James had already provided the combination, obtained through their inside sources. David opened the safe with trembling hands and gasped at what he saw inside. There were diamond necklaces, emerald bracelets, ruby earrings, and a collection of watches that looked like they belonged in a museum. As David carefully packed the jewelry into the padded bag Tommy had given him, he tried not to think about what he was doing. He focused instead on Emma, on the surgery she needed, on the treatments that would save her life. This wasn't stealing, this was survival. This was love in its most desperate form. The job took exactly 47 minutes from start to finish. They left with over $400,000 worth of jewelry, art, and electronics. The family wouldn't even return from Europe for another month, and by then, the items would be long gone through Tommy's network of fences and buyers. David's share was $85,000. More money than he had ever seen in his life. Enough to cover Emma's surgery and the first round of chemotherapy. Tommy handed him the cash in a plain envelope 3 days later, and David stared at it like it might disappear if he blinked. "How do you feel?" Tommy asked. David was quiet for a long moment. "Like I've lost something I can never get back," he finally said. "But also like I can save my daughter's life." "That feeling never goes away," Tommy said softly. "The guilt, I mean. But the alternative is worse. Much worse." Emma's surgery went perfectly. Dr. Rodriguez was able to remove 90% of the tumor, and Emma's recovery was faster than anyone had expected. Within a week, she was sitting up in bed, asking for her favorite books and complaining about the hospital food. David had never been so happy to hear his daughter complain about anything in his life. The first round of chemotherapy began 2 weeks later. David sat beside Emma's bed, holding her hand as the powerful drugs flowed into her small body. She was brave beyond her years, never complaining about the nausea or the fatigue that followed each treatment. "Daddy, how did you get the money for the doctors?" Emma asked one afternoon during her treatment. David's blood went cold. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Mommy told me that our insurance didn't want to pay for my treatments. But then suddenly they did. How did that happen?" David struggled to find words. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions to protect the people they love. The important thing is that you're getting better. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. But David could see intelligence in her eyes that went beyond her 12 years. She knew something had changed, even if she couldn't put her finger on exactly what. The second job came 6 weeks later. This time, it was a penthouse. apartment in Manhattan owned by a pharmaceutical executive who was spending the winter in his house in the Caribbean. The apartment contained a collection of rare books, vintage wines, and a safe full of cash and bearer bonds. David found the second job easier than the first, which worried him. He moved through the apartment with confidence now, knowing exactly what to look for and how to find it. The moral anguish that had consumed him during the first job was replaced by a cold efficiency that frightened him. His share from the second job was $95,000. Combined with what remained from the first job, David now had enough to cover the rest of Emma's chemotherapy and her radiation treatments. Emma was responding well to the treatments. Her latest scans showed that the remaining tumor tissue was shrinking rapidly. But something had changed in David. Sarah noticed it first. "You seem different," she said one evening as they sat in Emma's hospital room. "More distant. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," David lied. "Just tired from working so many extra shifts." But David wasn't working extra shifts at his security job. He was planning heists with Tommy's crew, studying floor plans and security systems, learning the habits and schedules of wealthy families. He had become someone he didn't recognize, and the stranger looking back at him from the mirror scared him. Emma's health continued to improve. Dr. Rodriguez was cautiously optimistic. The combination of surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation was working better than anyone had hoped. Emma's hair was starting to grow back, and she had gained back most of the weight she had lost during the early treatments. "I think we're going to beat this thing," Sarah said one evening, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Our little girl is going to be okay." David should have felt pure happiness, but instead, he felt a complicated mixture of relief, guilt, and fear. Emma was getting better, but at what cost? What had he become in the process of saving her? And what would happen if anyone ever found out what he had done? The third job was supposed to be the last one. David had enough money to cover Emma's medical expenses, with some left over for their family's future. He could walk away from Tommy's crew, go back to being a regular security guard, and try to rebuild the sense of integrity that he had sacrificed to save his daughter. But the third job went wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. The target was a mansion in Beverly Hills, owned by a movie producer who was supposed to be in New York for a film festival. But the producer had changed his plans at the last minute. Returning home a day early, he walked into his house while Tommy's crew was still inside. David was in the home office, downloading files from the producer's computer that James could later use to access offshore bank accounts. When he heard the shouting from downstairs, his blood turned to ice as he recognized the sound of a struggle. By the time David reached the main floor, chaos had erupted. The producer had surprised Sophia in the living room, and she had panicked, hitting him with a heavy crystal vase. The man was on the floor, bleeding from a head wound, unconscious but breathing. "We have to go," Marcus said urgently. "Now? Leave everything and go." But Tommy was standing over the unconscious producer, his face pale with fear and rage. He saw Sophia's face. He saw all of our faces. "If he lives, he can identify us." "So what are you saying?" David asked, though he already knew the answer, and it made him sick to his stomach. "I'm saying we can't leave witnesses," Tommy replied, pulling a gun from his jacket. "I'm saying this isn't just burglary anymore." David stared at the gun in horror. "Tommy, no. We're not killers. We agreed. No violence. No one gets hurt." "Plans change," Tommy said coldly. "This is about survival now. His survival or ours." Sophia was crying, her hands covered in the producer's blood. Marcus was backing toward the door, clearly wanting to run. James was standing frozen, staring at the gun in Tommy's hand. "I won't be part of murder," David said quietly. "This isn't what I signed up for." "Then you should have thought about that before you joined my crew," Tommy snapped. "You're already part of this, David. You're already complicit. The only question now is whether you're going to prison for burglary or for murder." The producer groaned and started to move, his eyes fluttering open. He looked directly at David, and David saw recognition dawn in the man's eyes. The producer had seen his face clearly. "Please," David whispered, not sure if he was talking to Tommy or to God or to the universe itself. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way," Tommy said, raising the gun. David closed his eyes and thought about Emma, about the treatments that had saved her life, about the money that had made those treatments possible. He thought about Sarah, about little Michael, about the life he had built and the man he used to be. When he opened his eyes, Tommy was pointing the gun at the producer's head. and David had to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. In that moment, standing in that Beverly Hills mansion with Tommy's gun pointed at an innocent man's head, David Chen faced the ultimate test of who he really was. Everything he had done up to that point, the burglaries, the lies, the gradual erosion of his moral foundation, had led to this single moment of choice. "Tommy, don't do this," David pleaded one more time. "We can find another way. We can leave the country, disappear, anything but this." "It's too late for that," Tommy replied, his voice cold and determined. "He's seen all of us. The moment he wakes up fully, we're all going to prison for the rest of our lives." The producer was becoming more alert, trying to sit up despite the blood streaming from his head wound. His eyes moved from face to face, clearly memorizing their features. David could see the man's fear, but also his determination to survive and to see justice done. "Please," the producer whispered through swollen lips. "I have children, a wife. I won't tell anyone. I swear I won't tell anyone." Those words, about children and a wife, hit David like a physical blow. This man was just like him, just like all of them. He was a father who wanted to go home to his family, who had people depending on him, who had never asked to be part of this nightmare. "Tommy," David said quietly, "if you pull that trigger, you're not saving us. You're destroying us. All of us. We're already destroyed," Tommy snapped. "The only question is whether we're going to prison or to the electric chair." But as Tommy's finger tightened on the trigger, David made his choice. He lunged forward and knocked Tommy's arm aside just as the gun fired. The bullet went wide, shattering an expensive vase instead of ending a man's life. Tommy spun toward David in rage, raising the gun to point it at him instead. "You stupid, idealistic fool. You've killed us all." "Maybe," David said, his voice surprisingly calm. "But at least I can still look at myself in the mirror. At least I can still face my daughter." What happened next unfolded in slow motion. Marcus, who had been edging toward the door, suddenly bolted, running out into the night. Sophia dropped the bloody crystal vase and followed him, her sobs echoing through the mansion. James hesitated for a moment, looking between Tommy, David, and the injured producer, before making his own choice to flee. Tommy stood alone with David and the wounded man, his gun wavering between them. In his eyes, David could see the war between desperation and humanity, between the criminal he had become and the father he still was underneath. "My daughter," Tommy whispered, and for the first time, his voice cracked. "My little girl is alive because of the money from these jobs. How am I supposed to explain to her that Daddy is going to prison? How do I tell her that the treatments that saved her life came from blood money?" "The same way I'm going to have to explain it to Emma," David replied sadly. "With the truth, and with the hope that our children are better people than we became." Tommy lowered the gun, and David saw something break inside the older man. The facade of the hardened criminal crumbled away, revealing the broken father underneath. Tommy sat down heavily on an expensive leather chair and put his head in his hands. "Call 911, David said to the producer, who was struggling to reach his phone. "Get yourself medical attention, and then do whatever you need to do." The producer stared at David in confusion. You're not going to hurt me." "No," David said firmly. "We're not going to hurt you. We never should have been here in the first place." As they waited for the ambulance and police to arrive, Tommy looked up at David with tears in his eyes. "How do you do it? How do you live with knowing that everything you did for your child was wrong?" David was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet," he finally answered. "But I'm going to have to figure it out." The police arrived 12 minutes later, followed closely by the ambulance. David and Tommy were arrested without resistance. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, David thought about Emma, about the phone call he would have to make to Sarah, about the conversation he would have to have with his children, about why Daddy wasn't coming home. The next few hours passed in a blur of booking procedures, mugshots, and interrogation rooms. David waived his right to an attorney and told Detective Marcus Thompson, me, everything. Every job, every stolen item, every compromise he had made in the name of saving his daughter's life. I had been expecting defiance, excuses, or at least some attempt at minimizing his guilt. Instead, I got complete honesty from a man who seemed almost relieved to finally be able to tell someone the truth. "I know you're going to ask me if I regret it," David said as we concluded his statement. "And the honest answer is that I don't know. My daughter is alive. She's healthy. The tumor is gone. and Dr. Rodriguez says her chances of a full recovery are excellent. How can I regret something that saved her life? But, I prompted, sensing there was more. But I look at myself and don't recognize who I've become. I've lied to my wife every day for months. I've stolen from people who never did anything to hurt me. I've put my family in a position where they're going to have to live with the shame of what I've done for the rest of their lives. David's voice broke. Emma is going to have to grow up knowing that her medical treatments were paid for with stolen money. How is she supposed to live with that knowledge? The legal proceedings that followed were swift but painful. Tommy, Marcus, Sophia, and James were all arrested within 48 hours. The evidence against all of them was overwhelming, and the prosecutor was pushing for maximum sentences. But the case took an unexpected turn when several victims came forward to make statements. The tech billionaire, whose Hampton mansion had been burglarized, surprised everyone by requesting leniency for David specifically. I've read about his daughter's medical situation, the billionaire said in his victim impact statement. I'm not excusing what he did. Theft is theft. But I understand desperation. I have children too. If one of my kids was dying and I didn't have the money to save them, I can't honestly say I wouldn't consider doing the same thing. Other victims echoed similar sentiments. They wanted justice, but they also recognized the difference between David's motivation and that of typical criminals. The pharmaceutical executive, whose Manhattan apartment had been robbed, even offered to help pay for Emma's ongoing medical expenses, saying, "No child should die because their parents can't afford treatment." Sarah's reaction was the hardest thing David had to face. When she visited him in jail for the first time, she looked like she had aged 10 years in the week since his arrest. "How could you lie to me?" she asked through tears. "How could you look me in the eye every day and pretend to be the man I married when you were living this double life?" "Because I knew you would try to stop me," David answered honestly. "And Emma would have died. We could have found another way. We could have sold everything we owned, borrowed against our future earnings, asked every friend and relative. We tried all of that, Sarah. You know we did. It wasn't enough, and we were running out of time." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "The worst part," she finally said, "is that I understand. I hate that I understand, but I do. If the situations were reversed, if you had been the one in the hospital and I was the one facing the impossible choice between crime and watching you die, I don't know what I would have done either." Emma's reaction, when Sarah finally told her the truth, was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. She came to visit David in jail, a tiny 12-year-old girl, sitting across from her father in an orange jumpsuit, trying to process the revelation that her treatments had been paid for with stolen money. "Daddy, are you a bad man?" she asked in a small voice. David considered lying, considered trying to make himself look better in his daughter's eyes. But he had lied enough. "I did bad things, Emma. I made bad choices because I was scared of losing you. I don't know if that makes me a bad man or just a man who made terrible mistakes. But I'm alive because of what you did." "Yes, you're alive. And I'm grateful for that every day. But I'm also sorry that my choices have put this burden on you and your mother and your brother." Emma was quiet for a long time, playing with the sleeves of her sweater. When she finally spoke, her words were wise beyond her years. "I wish you hadn't done it, Daddy. I wish there had been another way. But I'm glad I'm not dead. Does that make me bad too?" "No, sweetheart. That makes you human. We all want to live, and there's nothing wrong with being grateful for life, even when it comes at a cost." The trial lasted 3 weeks. David pled guilty to multiple counts of burglary and theft. His lawyer argued for leniency, based on his motivation and his cooperation with the investigation. The prosecutor pushed for a harsh sentence to send a message that desperation doesn't justify crime. In the end, David was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 5 years. Tommy received 12 years. The others received sentences ranging from 6 to 10 years, depending on their level of involvement and criminal history. As David was led away after sentencing, he looked back at Sarah and Emma in the courtroom gallery. Emma was crying, but she mouthed, "I love you, Daddy," as he was taken away. Sarah just nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed forgiveness, understanding, and heartbreak all at once. Now, 3 years into his sentence, David spends his days working in the prison library and his evenings writing letters to Emma and Michael. Emma is 15 now, a sophomore in high school, who wants to study oncology so she can help other children with cancer. Her latest scans continue to show no signs of the tumor returning. Michael is 7 and asks when Daddy is coming home. Sarah tells him someday. But David knows that even when he's released, their family will never be the same. The trust that was broken, the secrets that were kept, the moral compromises that were made, these things leave scars that never fully heal. In his letters to me, David often reflects on the question of whether he made the right choice. He saved his daughter's life, but at what cost? Was Emma's life worth the destruction of 3 other families whose homes were burglarized? Was it worth the trauma inflicted on the producer who was nearly killed? Was it worth the loss of his own integrity and the damage to his family's future? I used to think that love justified everything. David wrote in his most recent letter, I thought that being a good father meant being willing to do anything for your children, no matter the cost to yourself or anyone else. But I've learned that real love sometimes means accepting limits, even when those limits might cost you everything. David Chen will be eligible for parole in 2 years. When he's released, he'll face the challenge of rebuilding relationships with his children, who will have grown up largely without him. He'll have to find work as a convicted felon, help support a family that learned to survive without him, and somehow find a way to live with the choices he made. Emma Chen is alive today because her father was willing to sacrifice everything for her. But the weight of that sacrifice, the burden of knowing that her life came at such a terrible cost, is something she'll carry with her forever. As I finish writing this story, I find myself thinking about the thin line between heroism and villainy, between love and obsession, between sacrifice and selfishness. David Chen saved his daughter's life, but he also destroyed his family in the process. He was both the best father in the world and the worst father in the world, often at the exact same moment. The weight of a father's love, as David learned too late, can indeed be heavier than any burden a man is meant to carry. But sometimes we carry it anyway, even when it crushes us in the process. Because that's what love does. It makes heroes and villains of us all, sometimes in the very same act. And in the end, we have to live with the choices we make, and hope that the people we love can forgive us for the lengths we went to protect them. David Chen sits in his cell tonight, 3 years into his sentence, writing another letter to his daughter. In it, he tells her about his day, asks about her schoolwork, and reminds her how proud he is of the young woman she's becoming. He doesn't mention the nightmares he still has about that night in Beverly Hills, or the guilt that eats at him every day, or the way he lies awake wondering if there really was another way he just wasn't brave enough to find. Instead, he signs the letter the same way he signs every letter, all my love, Daddy, because in the end, love is all any of us have, even when it's not enough, even when it's too much, even when it destroys us, even when it saves us.